He found her chained to the well at dawn, a weathered plank above her. Cheat. The chain was a log chain. Thick links, the kind you'd use to drag a stump out of the earth. It ran from the iron ring bolted into the well's top stone, around her waist twice, and was padlocked at her hip with a lock I recognized, the sort that blacksmiths sell for barn doors. Her wrists were bound in front with rope, not chain, and the rope had been there long enough that the hemp had darkened with her sweat. The plank was cedar, rough cut. Whoever wrote the word had done it with a branding iron, pressing each letter hard and slow so it wouldn't fade. Cheat. Hung around her neck on a length of baling twine, the plank resting against her collarbone. It was just past dawn. The sky behind the mesa was that pale gray that doesn't know yet if it's going to be a good day or a bad one. I'd ridden in from the north, coming down off the caprock, looking for water. My horse smelled the well before I saw it, and she'd pulled to the right on her own. That's how I found the Reardon place. I didn't know it was called the Reardon place yet. I didn't know anything about any of it. I just saw a woman chained to a well in somebody's yard. She was sitting with her back against the well's stone wall, legs stretched out in front of her, boots still on. She hadn't been crying, her face was dry. But her eyes, when she lifted them and saw me come through the gate, had that particular flatness that means a person has moved past crying, past fear, past whatever comes after fear, into a place that's just waiting. She was 30, maybe 32. Dark hair loose and tangled. She'd been there all night at least. I could tell by the way she held herself against the cold, shoulders drawn in, body trying to make a smaller target for the air. I pulled up about 10 feet out and looked at her. Then I looked at the yard, at the house. The front door was shut. No smoke from the chimney. No horses at the rail. I got down. She watched me without moving, not scared of me, which struck me. Or maybe she'd been scared of so many things by then that one more man on horseback didn't register as a separate category of trouble. I said, "Who put you here?" She said, "Half the town." She said it the way you'd say the weather had turned cold, matter of fact, not asking for anything. I walked to the well, looked at the chain, looked at the lock. Heavy brass lock, quality piece. I looked at the rope on her wrists, which was simpler. "I'm going to cut that rope," I said. "That all right with you?" She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "Yes." I got my knife off my belt and cut the rope. It took some working. They'd tied it well, 3 or 4 wraps and a knot I had to dig at. Her wrists came free, and she brought her hands to her lap and pressed them together. There were red marks, and one place on her right wrist where the skin had broken and dried. She didn't make a sound. I looked at the chain and the lock. "I don't have a bolt cutter," I said, "and I'm not going to try to break a blacksmith's lock with a knife handle. Is there a tool shed?" She tipped her head toward the back of the house. He kept tools in the lean-to. I went and looked. The lean-to was half full of implements, some old, some less old. There was no bolt cutter, but there was a cold chisel and a maul. I carried them back. She watched me set the lock's shackle on the top stone of the well and raise the maul. "The sound will carry," she said. "I know it." I brought the maul down on the cold chisel. It took 4 hits, the lock was good, and then the shackle gave. I unwound the chain from around her and it fell against the stones. She stood up slowly, pressing one hand to the small of her back. Her legs weren't steady at first. She gripped the well's edge and breathed. I gave her a minute. Then I said, "What happened?" She looked at me. "You don't know me, you don't know any of it." "No." "Then why?" "I found a woman chained to a well," I said. "That's what happened. Rest of it I don't know yet." She looked out at the road, then back at me. She said, "My name is Vera Hollies. My husband's name was Thomas Reardon. He died 4 months ago." She paused. "People here believe I poisoned him for his land." "Did you?" She turned those flat eyes on me, and for the first time something moved in them, not anger exactly, but the cousin of it. "No." "All right," I said. She waited for more. I didn't give her more because there wasn't more to give. Either she was telling the truth or she wasn't. Either the town had done something unforgivable or there was a thing underneath it I didn't know yet. Both could be true at the same time. I'd seen enough of the world to know that. My horse was at the fence, watching us with her brown eyes. I walked over and unstrapped my canteen and brought it back. Drink. Vera Hollis drank. A long pull, then she stopped herself, then another. She handed it back and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Thank you, she said. I nodded. Is there food in the house? Some. Go inside, get warm. I'll water my horse, and we'll figure out what comes next. She looked at me again, that same slow, measuring look she'd given me the first time. Then she walked toward the house. She walked straight, not stumbling, and she went inside without looking back. I stood there at the well for a moment. I looked at the chain on the ground, the broken lock, the cedar plank with cheat burned into it. I picked the plank up and set it on the well's edge. Then I thought about it for another moment, and I picked it back up, and I threw it into the scrub beyond the fence. My name is Caleb Dodd. I was 47 years old that morning. I'd been moving since the end of the war, not running from anything in particular, just not finding any particular reason to stop. I'd done stints as a scout, a drover, a freighter. The last year I'd been working cattle up in the Panhandle territory for a man named Cruces who paid fair and didn't ask too many questions. I'd left Cruces' spread 3 weeks back when the season wound down, and I'd been making my way south and west without a fixed point in mind. Just riding. The way a man does when he's tired enough that rest doesn't help, and moving at least gives the day some purpose. I'd killed men in the war. I'd killed men after the war, 2 of them, and both were the kind of killing that a clean conscience can live with, though a conscience that's truly clean doesn't have the kind of history mine has. I had a Remington on my hip and a repeating carbine in the saddle boot, and I knew how to use both of them, and I hadn't drawn on a man in 3 years, and I'd been hoping to keep that stretch going. I'm telling you all this so you understand what I was and wasn't when I rode through that gate. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't particularly noble. I was a worn-down, sun-seasoned man who'd found a woman chained to a well, and I have enough of what my mother would have called basic human decency left in me that I couldn't ride past that any more than I could fly. Inside the house, Vera had found a fire. The house was small, 2 rooms, and the main room was already warming when I came in. She'd put a pot on and cut some dried beef into it, and there was a half loaf of bread on the table that she'd sliced. She stood at the stove, and she did not look like a woman who expected to be thanked for it. She looked like a woman who needed something to do with her hands. I sat at the table. The house had the feel of a place that had been left off somehow, not filthy, not neglected exactly, just stopped. Like a clock someone forgot to wind. Thomas Reardon's coat was still on the peg by the door. How long have you been alone here? I asked. Since he died. She brought 2 bowls to the table. 4 months. They let me alone for the first month. Watched the house. Then one of his cousins came and said the property should go to the family. I said it was my property by law. That was when things changed. Changed how? She sat down across from me. Remarks first in town at the dry goods. The woman who runs the laundry stopped speaking to me. Then someone put a dead cat on the porch. Then the cousin, Merritt Reardon, he's the one runs things in this county. He got the doctor to say Thomas might have died from something other than his heart. She broke a piece of bread. Doctor's name is Fassel. He's been wanting the parcel south of here that Merritt promised him. They were very tidy about it. And last night. She was quiet for a moment. I went to town to post a letter to a lawyer in Santa Fe. On my way back, coming through the main street, there were men waiting. 8, 10 of them. Merritt and Fassel and some others. They took my horse and they walked me back here. She looked at the tabletop. They said if I didn't sign the deed over, they'd put me in the chain until I saw reason. They put the plank on me. They said they'd come back in the morning and I could sign or I could stay there until I did. I ate, The broth was thin, but it was warm. You sign anything? I asked. No. They'll come back. Yes. When? Morning, it's morning now. She looked at the window. The light had shifted, it was fuller now, the gray gone, the sky proper blue. They'll come this morning. I looked at her, she looked at me. All right, I said. I finished eating. I carried my bowl to the basin, and I went and got my carbine from the saddle boot, and I brought it inside, and I leaned it against the wall by the door. Then I went back and I sat down at the table again, and I drank the rest of my coffee, and I thought. There were things I could have done. I could have put her on my horse and ridden out. That was the cleanest option, get clear of a county dispute, avoid whatever was coming. I thought about that option for the time it takes to drink half a cup of bad coffee. Then I set the cup down. There's something about a man who uses law the way Merritt Riordan had used it, the doctor in his pocket, the plank around a woman's neck, that has always set something in me very cold and very still. Not hot, cold. The hot kind of anger is the kind that gets men killed without purpose. The cold kind is the kind that stays accurate. I wasn't going to ride out. You said you wrote a lawyer, I said, in Santa Fe. Yes, Thomas had a lawyer there when he bought the land. I wrote to him explaining what Merritt was doing and asking what my rights were. You send that letter. Merritt took it from my hand when they stopped me. He read it and put it in his coat. So the lawyer doesn't know? No. You have another copy of what you wrote. She shook her head. Then she said, but I know what I wrote, I know all of it. Good, after this is settled I'll help you write another one, more than one. She looked at me. After this is settled, she repeated. Like she was testing the weight of the phrase. That's right. She folded her hands on the table. Mr. Dodd, Caleb Dodd. Mr. Dodd, you don't know this county. You don't know Merritt Riordan. He has men who do what he says, and he has the sheriff, whose name is Aldous Peer, and Peer will do exactly what Merritt tells him. You are one man. Yes. I don't understand why you're still here. I thought about how to answer that. Then I said, I found a woman chained to a well with a slander hung around her neck. That's not something a man rides away from, not a man worth anything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said quietly, that's a very simple way to look at it. Most things are simpler than people make them. Something crossed her face then, not a smile, not yet, but the precursor to one. A slight easing. It was gone quickly. They'll have guns, she said. I expect so. Merritt will try to get the law on it. Peer will say you assaulted men trying to enforce a legal judgment. There is no legal judgment, I said. Chaining a woman to a well isn't a legal judgment. It's assault. Peer will know that if he thinks about it. Peer doesn't think, he does. Then we'll manage Peer separately if it comes to it. She stared at me. I said, is there anyone else in this county who isn't in Merritt's pocket? A preacher, a justice of the peace, somebody who runs a newspaper. She thought, there's a man named Galt. He runs the feed store. He didn't say anything when all this started, but I've seen the way he looks when Merritt talks, like he's swallowed something sour. That's something, anyone else. Mrs. Thorne. She runs the boarding house. She was kind to me when Thomas died. She stopped coming around when things got bad, but I think she stopped because she was afraid, not because she believed what Merritt was saying. All right, Galt and Mrs. Thorne, that's something. I went to the window and looked at the road, still empty. How many men did Merritt have last night? I asked. 8 or 10. Some of them were drunk, some were, I don't think they all believed it. I think some of them were just following Merritt, because that's what you do in this county. Men following because that's what you do, I said. Those are the ones who stop when they see it might cost them something. I turned back from the window. I need you to go to the back room and stay there. Lock the door if there is one. If there isn't, push something heavy against it. Her jaw set. This is my house. It is, and I need you safe in the back of it. She looked at me a long moment. I can still picture her face then, the set of her chin, the tiredness under her eyes, the thing that was measuring me and not yet fully decided. She said, you won't trade, if they offer you something to ride on. I'm not for sale. She held my eyes a moment longer. Then she went to the back room. I checked the Remington, checked the carbine. I moved the table slightly so it wasn't between me and the door. I found a second chair and put it against the far wall, because a room with one obvious place to stand is a room someone can aim into without thinking. Then I stood near the window and waited. They came at maybe 9 o'clock. Merritt Reardon was in front. He was a thick-built man, maybe 50, with a good horse under him and the kind of clothing that says he thinks of himself as a person of quality. There were 6 men with him, which was fewer than the night before. Some of those men, when they got closer, had that slightly careful look. They'd come because Merritt expected them to come. But they weren't drunk now, and it was daylight, and things looked different in daylight. Dr. Fassel was there. Small man on a gray horse, spectacles, the look of a man who has convinced himself that his interests and the right thing are the same thing, and is working very hard not to look at that too closely. Sheriff Peer came last. Heavy jowled, badge on his vest. He held himself like a man who is used to his presence ending disputes before they start, and he could already see from the broken lock on the ground and the missing plank and the smoke from the chimney that things were not the way he'd expected. Merritt pulled up at the gate. Vera, he called. Come out, time to settle this. I came to the doorway instead. I didn't step out, I stood in the doorway, carbine at rest in the crook of my arm. I was in the shadow of the doorframe, which matters. Men in shadow are harder to read. Merritt looked at me. He looked at the broken lock on the ground. He looked at the empty well, the chain coiled there, nobody in it. Who are you? He said. Man passing through, I said. Found a woman chained to your well, freed her. That woman is under a legal order. No, she isn't, I said. I've been around long enough to know what a legal order looks like. A legal order comes from a judge. What you've got is a log chain and a padlock and a piece of burned cedar, and what you did with them is criminal assault. You know that, Sheriff. Peer looked at Merritt. Merritt's jaw worked. She poisoned my cousin, Merritt said. The doctor will testify. The doctor will testify whatever you're paying him to testify, I said. That's between him and God. Right now what I'm concerned with is this morning and what you're going to do next. One of the 6 men in back, younger, maybe 25, with a face that hadn't made up its mind about things yet, shifted in his saddle. Not toward me. Sideways. The way a man does when he's thinking about not being where he is. You need to step aside, Peer said, finding his voice, or I'll take you in for interfering with. Interfering with what? I said. There's no legal proceeding here. There's a woman on her own property and a group of men who locked her to a piece of stone in the cold and left her all night. I looked at Peer directly. You signed off on that, Sheriff. That's in your record someplace. Peer didn't say anything. Because, I said, I expect that lawyer in Santa Fe, when he hears about it, is going to want to know who the sheriff was and what he did and didn't do. And I expect there are men in this territory who outrank you considerably who will also want to know. The young man in the back had fully turned his horse sideways now. Another man beside him, older, a working hand by the look of him, was looking at the ground. Merritt's face had gone a color. You're one man, he said. Yes, I said. But I'm one man standing in a doorway with a carbine and nowhere to be, and you're 8 men who have to go home to your families afterward and look at what you did. I looked past Merritt at the men behind him. Some of you are here because Merritt asked you to be here. I understand that, but chaining a widow to a well in the dark is a thing a man carries. You'll carry it. The young man rode out of the group. He didn't say anything. He just turned and rode back toward town. After a moment, the working hand followed. Merritt turned to watch them go, and in that turn I saw something crack in him, not break, not yet, but the first crack of a man who expected to be backed and is finding out he isn't. Dr. Fassel said, very quietly, Merritt. Shut up, Merritt said. He turned back to me. His hand was near his gun but not on it, and I could see him thinking, running the numbers, the way men do in those moments, trying to figure out what this costs in each direction. The land is Reardon land, he said. It should stay Reardon. Then make that case to a judge, I said. That's what courts are for. That's the whole point of them. You want to contest the deed, contest the deed. You do not chain a woman to a well. Another man left, and another. Merritt sat there with Fassel and Pierre, and two men who hadn't moved yet. His good horse moved under him, tossing its head. This isn't settled, Merritt said. No, I agreed, but it's settled for today, and today's enough. He held there a moment longer. Then he pulled his horse around and he rode out. Fassel followed quickly, not looking back. Pierre sat there one moment more. He looked at me with a look that had several things in it, none of them pleasant, and then he left too. The last two men rode out without a word. I stood in the doorway until the sound of horses had gone, and then I stood there a little longer because sound carries and I wanted to be sure. Then I went to the back room and knocked. They've gone, I said. A pause. Then the door opened. Vera stood there and she had that flat look again, but it was different now. Not the flatness of a person waiting, but the flatness of a person absorbing something, figuring out what it means. She looked past me at the door. For now, she said. Yes. For now. She came out into the main room and stood at the window and looked at the empty road. I put the carbine back against the wall and I sat down at the table. She said without turning, he'll go to the judge in Cimarron. Likely. Fassel will write an affidavit. Yes, that's why the letter to Santa Fe matters. You need your lawyer to move faster than Merritt can. She turned from the window. She crossed to the table and sat down, and she put her hands flat on the table in front of her, and she looked at them. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You don't need to. I do, she looked up. I was out there all night. I didn't think, she stopped. I didn't think anyone was going to come. I didn't say anything. She said, why didn't you ride on? I'd answered this already or tried to, but I could see she was asking it differently now. Not asking the practical reason, asking the real one. I thought about it. The honest answer was something I hadn't said out loud in a long time, maybe ever. I've ridden past things I shouldn't have, I said. A long time ago and more recently than I'd like. A man keeps a ledger, not always on purpose, but he keeps it. I looked at the table. I'm 47 years old and I'm still moving because I haven't found the place I want to stop yet. But there are things you don't pass by. You stop for those. And then maybe you figure out whether this is the place. Vera looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a while. She said Thomas was a good man. People thought he wasn't toward the end because he got sick and the sickness made him short, but he was good. He built this place from bare ground. She touched the table with one finger. He built this table. He made it from a cottonwood he took down himself. A pause. When he died I thought I'd carry it. The ranch. It's not much but it's good land and the water's reliable. I know how to work it. I thought I'd carry it. Her jaw tightened. Then Merritt started. How long ago was Merritt's first move? 6 weeks after Thomas died, maybe 7. And you've been alone here 3 months. Yes. I looked around the room, the stop clock feeling of it, Reardon's coat on the peg. You've been holding on, I said. Trying to. You've done it. She shook her head slightly. I was chained to a well this morning. You didn't sign, I said. They had you out there all night. You didn't sign. Something moved across her face. The precursor to that almost smile again, and this time it made it a little further. No, she said, I didn't. I said we need to get that letter written. Today if we can. Do you have paper? Yes. And someone who can carry it to Santa Fe faster than the regular post. Reliable man, someone Merritt can't get to. She thought, Galt. His son makes runs to Las Vegas and Santa Fe. He's 18 and he's fast and he doesn't like Merritt. Merritt shorted him on a timber deal last spring. Good, I'll go talk to Galt this afternoon. She looked at me. You're going to town? Yes. Merritt will know. That's fine. I want him to know I'm not going anywhere. She was quiet. Then she said, You should know that what he said about the land, it's not worth dying over, Mr. Dodd. I want you to know that. I don't want, she paused. I've already lost one man on this property. I don't want that twice. I looked at her. The way she said it, plain and direct, with that careful holding of the feeling underneath. That's not the plan, I said. Plans don't always hold. No, but I don't intend to get shot over a land deed. I intend to make it expensive enough for Merritt to go through proper channels, and then I intend to help you win in proper channels. That's a slower road, but it's the one that sticks. She held my eyes. And after, when this is settled, what do you do then? I told you, I've been looking for a place to stop. She looked at the table. This isn't much of a place. I've seen worse. A long quiet, the fire ticked. Outside a crow called once far off. She said the south pasture needs fencing. Half of it is down. I can do fence. The well casing needs work too. Thomas kept putting it off. I can do that too. She looked at me again, and in that look there was something new, not the measuring of before, not the flatness of a night chained in the cold. Something opening, careful but opening. I can't pay you, she said. Didn't ask you to. She was quiet for a moment, then, room and board if you'll take it. I'll take it. I went to town that afternoon. I rode slow and I kept my hands loose, and I came in through the main street because I wanted to be seen coming in through the main street. I tied my horse at the rail in front of Galt's feed store, and I went inside. Galt was a long-boned man with hands like a carpenter and eyes that had seen a good deal and kept their own counsel. He looked at me when I came in, and I could see he'd already heard something. In a town this size, news from 9 in the morning gets to the feed store before noon. He said, You're the man from the Reardon place. Caleb Dodd, I said, Yes. He leaned on the counter. He didn't say anything. He was weighing. I said, Vera Hollies needs a letter carried to Santa Fe. To a lawyer. She needs it done fast and quiet and by someone Merritt Reardon can't lean on. She said your son might be that man. Galt looked at me. Why should I put my son in the middle of this? Because, I said, what happened last night on that property was not right and you know it. And because if Merritt gets away with it here, the next thing he wants he'll take the same way. And there'll be someone else chained to something. Galt was quiet for a long time. His big hands were flat on the counter. He said, Merritt came in here this morning, before you came to town, said you'd assaulted his men. I stood in a doorway. Something moved in Galt's face, almost a smile but drier. That's what I heard too. I said, Will you ask your son? Galt thought, then he called toward the back. Edwin. Edwin was a young man, 18 or 19, rangy, with his father's eyes. He came out from the back and looked at me with the frank curiosity of someone who hasn't learned yet to hide it. His father told him what was needed. Edwin listened without interrupting. When Galt was done, Edwin said, I can ride tomorrow at first light. I know a lawyer in Santa Fe, not the same one but one that knows the territory law. He might be faster to reach than someone who doesn't know the county. I looked at Galt. Galt looked at his son and then at me. I'll tell Edwin what to say, Galt said. He knows more about this county's courthouse business than you might expect. All right, I said. Send him to the Reardon place this evening. Vera can tell him the full story and give him a letter she's writing. I started to go. At the door I stopped and turned back. She's a good woman, I said. She kept that place alone 3 months and she didn't sign when they chained her. There's not many who'd hold that long. Galt looked at me. In his face now there was something that might have been shame. Not for himself exactly, but for the situation he'd watched develop without stepping into it. No, he said, there aren't. I walked to the boarding house next. Mrs. Thorne was a compact, precise woman, probably 60, with a straight spine and the particular kind of firmness that comes from running a place alone for a long time. She opened the door and looked at me, and her first expression was wariness, then curiosity, then something else. I told her who I was. I told her I was at the Reardon place for now. I told her that Vera Hollies had been chained to a well all night, and that I'd freed her, and that Merritt had come with his men that morning and had gone away again. Mrs. Thorne stood in her doorway and listened to all of this without expression. When I was done, she said, "She's all right. Tired, some rope marks on her wrists, otherwise all right." Mrs. Thorne's jaw worked briefly. "I should have," she stopped, started again. "I was afraid of Merritt. I want you to know I never believed what they were saying." "I know," I said. "Vera told me you'd been kind." That seemed to settle something in the woman. "What do you need?" she said. "Nothing today. But when this goes to a hearing, and it will, Vera may need people in this town who will say what they saw and what they know. I wanted you to know that she has a man standing with her, and that she's not going to fold." Mrs. Thorne looked at me carefully. "Are you her kin?" "No. A friend of her husband's. Never met him." She absorbed this. "Then why?" "Because it's right," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, tell her I'll come out to the ranch, tomorrow or the next day. I should have come sooner." "I'll tell her." I rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the sun cutting long and orange across the caprock. The land out here was the kind that doesn't apologize for itself, dry and wide and demanding, with the occasional cedar and the red clay showing through where the grass gave up. I'd ridden through 100 pieces of country that looked like this, and none of them had asked me to stay. This one was starting to. I don't fully know how to explain that, because it wasn't the land specifically, it was the combination of things. The land and the woman in the house, and the fight that was honest and clear-lined and worth having. Vera had supper made when I got back. Not much, beans and salt pork and the last of the bread, but made, and the table set, and the lamp lit even though it wasn't dark yet. She looked up when I came in, and her eyes went over me quickly, checking, and the quick relief in her face when she saw I was all right was a thing she didn't try to hide. "Galt," she said. "His son Edwin is coming this evening. Galt himself might be useful later. Mrs. Thorne. She'll come out in a day or two." Vera let out a slow breath. Something in her shoulders dropped that I hadn't realized was held tight. "Sit down," she said. "Eat." We ate, and I told her about Galt and Edwin and Mrs. Thorne, and she listened and asked questions that were sharp and specific, and showed me she'd been thinking about the legal side of this for months, alone, carrying it. She knew more about the territory's property laws than most lawyers I'd met, which wasn't saying a great deal, but it said something about her. Edwin came just after dark, alone, riding a good compact roan that knew the country. He sat at the table, and Vera talked to him for an hour, the full story, the doctor, the deed, the chain, all of it. She was precise, and she didn't dramatize it, and she didn't ask for sympathy. She wanted a lawyer who could file papers and file them fast. Edwin listened and took notes in a neat hand on a folded sheet of paper and nodded in the right places. When Vera was done, Edwin said, "My father's friend in Santa Fe, his name is Kavanaugh. He's handled cases like this before. Men using medicine and leverage to push women off property. He doesn't like it." "Can he move fast?" Vera asked. He can be persuaded to, especially when he hears what was done. A pause. I'll tell him about the chain. Vera looked at her hands. Yes, tell him. Edwin rode out and we went to bed, she in the main bedroom, me on the rope frame in the smaller room with my coat over me, which was cold but not worse than half the places I'd slept in my life. I lay there and listened to the house settle. The wind off the caprock had come up, and it moved the loose board at the eave in a slow knocking rhythm. Somewhere outside a night bird called, and then didn't. I thought about Merritt Riordan. About the kind of man who builds himself up by pressing down, who needs the chain and the plank not just for the land but for the satisfaction of the press. I'd known men like that in the war, some of them on my side. The war doesn't make that type, it just gives them room. I thought about Vera, her flat eyes in the early light, the dried blood on her wrist, the way she'd stood up from the well's edge and walked to the house without stumbling. The way she talked to Edwin, clear and exact, and with the kind of controlled feeling that isn't coldness. It's what you do with feeling when coldness is not an option. I thought about what she'd said. This isn't much of a place. I'd said I'd seen worse. What I hadn't said was that I'd seen far worse and also nothing that looked better to me right then, which was its own kind of statement. I was still thinking about it when I fell asleep. The next 2 weeks were work. Edwin carried the letter and came back with word from Kavanaugh. He'd file for an injunction against any transfer of the property, and he'd begin collecting documentation. He needed Vera's affidavit, he needed a copy of the deed, and if there were witnesses to what had happened at the well, he needed their statements. Vera wrote her affidavit at the table, 3 pages in her careful handwriting, while I started in on the south pasture fence. The fence was bad, posts rotted, wire snapped in 6 or 8 places, the corner post leaning at an angle a man could read from 50 yards. I dug the corner post out and set a new one and poured a little of Riordan saved concrete around the base, and the old post when I pulled it came out wrong-shaped at the root, eaten by something. 3 days for the fence. The well casing was another job entirely. The mortar between the upper courses had crumbled and water was wicking into the gap, and in a hard winter it would crack. I patched it with fresh mortar that I had to make from scratch with sand from the creek bank, which took longer than the mixing. 2 days. There was other work. There was always other work. The roof on the lintel needed 2 new boards. The hinges on the main gate were binding. The trough needed clearing of the mineral buildup that comes from the particular water in this part of the country. Vera worked alongside me, not in the way of someone proving a point, but in the way of someone who knows the place and has been working it alone and doesn't see any reason to stop working it because someone else arrived. She could handle tools. She could read the land better than I could, because she'd been watching it for 3 years. She knew which patches held moisture and which drained fast, and which way the wind came from in the early season, and which way it shifted in summer. She told me about the ranch as we worked. Not in a rush, not all at once, but in the way of work talk, things that came up because they were relevant. Thomas had bought it cheap because of a boundary dispute that had since been settled. He'd proved the water in the first winter, and that had been the turning point. Water here, reliable water, was worth more than the deed itself. He'd been a quiet man, she said, not unhappy, just not given to much outward showing. Like you, she said once, and then glanced at me with something between amusement and seriousness, and I let it go because I didn't quite know what to do with it. Merritt came once. Not in force, he came alone on his good horse, and he rode to the gate and stopped there, and Vera and I were out at the fence line and could see him from 100 yards. He sat there a while. Then he rode away. I didn't know what that meant exactly, whether it was a message or just a man watching his plans fall apart. Either way, he didn't come back that day. Mrs. Thorne came, as she'd promised. She sat with Vera at the table for 2 hours, and I was out at the trough and didn't hear what they said. But when Mrs. Thorne rode out in the late afternoon, she stopped at the fence and looked at me. She's stronger than I knew, she said. Yes, I said. I wasn't. She said it flatly, without self-pity, just naming a fact. I let it go wrong because I was afraid. I want you to know I'll say what needs to be said when it goes to a hearing. I know you will, I said. She nodded and rode out. Galt came one evening with a man I didn't know, a weathered man about 60, with a surveyor's case on his horse. Tate, Galt said. He surveyed this parcel 3 years ago. He knows where the lines are and he knows Thomas Reardon bought it clean. Tate shook my hand and then Vera's, and he had the look of a man who had been thinking about something and decided to stop thinking and do it. He said he'd write a statement for Kavanaugh and he'd appear if it went to a trial. Merritt know you're out here? I asked. Merritt can know what he likes, Tate said. He said it with a simplicity that told me he'd had a long accounting with himself already and was past the part where Merritt mattered. The hearing was set for the 23rd. Kavanaugh came up from Santa Fe 3 days before and set up at Mrs. Thorne's boarding house, and I met with him the first evening. He was a small man with large ears and the kind of methodical mind that builds a case the way a careful man builds a wall, each stone placed before he moves to the next. He went over what he had: the deed, which was clear, Vera's affidavit, Tate's statement, Mrs. Thorne's statement, a written account from Edwin Galt of what he'd been told and what he'd seen when he came to the ranch that evening, and my own statement, which I'd written out at the table 2 nights back. My statement was the part Kavanaugh was most interested in, because I was the one who'd been there at dawn. You saw the chain, he said. Yes. The plank. Yes. And you observed her condition, the rope marks, the cold, the duration. Yes. He wrote something, and when Reardon and his men arrived, I told them to leave, I said. They left. He looked at me over his large ears. You were armed. I was standing in a doorway with a carbine. And no shots were fired. No. Reardon left voluntarily. He did. Kavanaugh wrote something else. Some of the men who were there that morning, 2 of them, I understand, have already told friends they weren't comfortable with what happened. The young one and the working hand, I said, they left early. Their discomfort may be useful. He tapped his pen. Reardon will argue that you were the aggressor, that you interfered with a legitimate community action. There's no such thing as a legitimate community action that involves chaining a woman to a well overnight in October. You and I know that, Kavanaugh said. The judge will know that. The issue is whether Merritt can muddy it enough to delay. He paused. He'll also try to impugn Mrs. Hollis's character, the accusation of poisoning. There was no inquest, Vera said, from where she sat at the end of the table. Thomas's death was certified natural by Dr. Fassel, who then changed his position when Merritt needed him to. There is no evidence. There was never any evidence. Kavanaugh looked at her. No, he agreed, but accusation and evidence are different things in front of a courtroom. I know, she said. I've been living that difference for 4 months. The day before the hearing, Merritt made his last move. It came through Pierre. The sheriff came to the ranch in the late morning with a folded paper and a look on his face that told me he didn't like this, but he was doing it. Warrant, he said, for Caleb Dodd, assault on Merritt Reardon and his associates, morning of October 7th. I took the paper and read it. I handed it to Vera, who read it. I looked at Pierre. I stood in a doorway, I said. I know, Pierre said. He said it quietly, which was the most interesting thing he'd said since I'd met him. You know, I said, so what are you doing here? Pierre's jaw moved. He was not a deep man, but he was not entirely a hollow one. He'd been Merritt's instrument for years because Merritt was the instrument of the county, and there are men who exist in the current and don't think much about which way it runs. But something had shifted. Kavanaugh's papers, Tate's survey statement, Mrs. Thorne. The current was running differently, and Pierre could feel it. "I have to bring you in," he said. "That's the warrant. And tomorrow's hearing. Happen regardless." I looked at Vera, she looked at me. "Go with him," she said. "You'll be. Kavanaugh is here. Galt and Mrs. Thorne are 5 minutes away, and I have been running this ranch alone for 3 months. The edge of something, not quite a smile, but near to it. I can manage one night." I went with Pierre. He put me in the jail, which was the back room of his office. A room with a cot and one window and no particularly secure lock. Not that I was going anywhere. I lay on the cot and looked at the ceiling and thought about the hearing tomorrow and what Kavanaugh had and whether it would hold. In the middle of the night, Pierre came back. He unlocked the cell and stood in the doorway and said quietly, "I want you to know I told Merritt this was a mistake, filing that warrant." I looked at him. "He didn't listen," Pierre said. "I didn't say anything." "I've been sheriff here 11 years, Pierre said. He said it like a man reading from a list of mistakes. "This county used to be different." "What changed?" "Merritt got bigger and I let him." He looked at the floor. "I'm telling you this because tomorrow I'm going to testify about the morning of October 7th, and I'm going to tell it straight. What I saw when I rode up to that property." I studied him. "What did you see?" "A man standing in a doorway," Pierre said. "No aggression, no weapon raised, and Merritt Reardon's men leaving of their own accord." He locked the cell again, but not, I noticed, as firmly as before. And in the morning, when Kavanaugh came and filed a counterclaim and the warrant was dismissed before the hearing began, Pierre was the one who opened the cell door. He handed me back my gun belt, and he said nothing and I said nothing, and we walked out of that building with a certain amount of unspoken understanding between us that would probably never be spoken. The hearing took half a day. The judge was a circuit judge named Beaumont, sparse, deliberate, with the look of a man who has heard every variety of county dispute and has stopped being surprised by any of it. He sat and he listened and he took notes, and his face did not change. Merritt had a lawyer from Cimarron, a man named Price who was smooth, and who tried to bring the poisoning question into the property matter, and who Beaumont shut down twice on the point that character is not a deed. Fassel testified and was sweating before he finished. Kavanaugh's cross-examination was quiet and precise, and by the end of it, Fassel had admitted that his first certification of Thomas Reardon's death, natural causes, heart, had been made without any reservation, and that his subsequent doubts had followed conversations with Merritt and had not followed any new medical evidence. Beaumont wrote something at that point and didn't look up. Tate testified. Mrs. Thorne testified. Galt testified. He decided to come himself rather than send Edwin, and he said what he'd seen in this county over the past year with the deliberate flatness of a man who has been deciding to say it for a while. Pierre testified and said what he'd said to me through the cell door. The young man from that morning, his name was Deke Calloway, I learned, had given Kavanaugh a written statement, because he wouldn't come himself, but he wouldn't lie on paper either. I testified last. Kavanaugh took me through it cleanly, what I'd seen at dawn, what I'd done, what had happened when Merritt came. When Price cross-examined me, he tried to paint the picture of a stranger inserting himself into a local matter with a weapon. I said I found a woman chained to a well with a sign hung around her neck. I freed her. When the men who chained her returned, I told them to leave. They left. I don't know what name you want to put on that. Beaumont looked at me for a moment, then he wrote something. He ruled that afternoon. The deed was valid. The property was Vera Hollies's. Any future claim against it would proceed through proper legal channels and on the basis of evidence. The action taken on the night of October 6th and the morning of October 7th constituted criminal assault and malicious harassment. He referred the matter to the territorial court for determination of charges. He did not do this lightly, he said. But a log chain was a log chain, and a burned plank was a burned plank, and a widow was a widow, and the law was the law. I stood in the back of that courtroom and I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time, something that isn't easy to name. The closest I can get to it is rightness, the thing that happens when a thing goes the way a thing should go. Vera didn't cry. She sat straight and she listened to Beaumont's ruling, and when it was done she thanked Kavanaugh and she shook Galt's hand and Mrs. Thorne's hand, and she looked at me across the courtroom, and what was in her face then, quiet and certain, and with something new in it, something unclenched, I didn't look away from. We rode back to the ranch that evening. The sun was going down behind us, and the shadow of us stretched long across the road in front. She said about halfway home, "You should know something." "All right." I knew, after that first morning, that you weren't going to leave. I looked at her. I knew it before you said anything about fencing or the well, before you offered to stay. She kept her eyes on the road. "I've been reading men a long time. You're the kind who chooses a thing and stays with it." I didn't say anything. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that I chose back." I held that for a moment, the weight of it and the simplicity of it. "I know," I said. We rode the rest of the way without talking. That was 16 years ago. The south fence has been rebuilt twice since then. The well casing has been repaired twice, and we finally replaced the whole upper course 4 years back when the mortar work I'd done that first autumn started showing its age. We added a room to the house in the second year, the one facing south that gets the morning light. 3 years after that we added another. Merritt Reardon was charged by the territorial court and paid a fine that he could afford, but that cost him something other than money in this county. Fassel lost his practice within the year, not violently, just gradually, the way a thing loses air. Pierre is still sheriff. He became a different kind of sheriff than he'd been, which I won't call redemption because that's too grand a word for a man doing his job correctly, but it was a change and it held. Galt's boy Edwin became a lawyer, which no one who knew him as an 18-year-old kid riding fast horses to Santa Fe would have predicted, though maybe they should have. Vera runs the books and the cattle and is better at both than I am, which is not a thing that bothers me. I'm better at the physical parts, the fencing and the building and the things that need a man's weight behind them. We figured out early what the other one was built for, and we didn't argue about the overlap. She's not a woman who says things she doesn't mean, and she doesn't say many things she does mean out loud, which is something I understand from the inside. But there are ways of saying a thing without words, and she has never been unclear with me about what I am to her. Not once in 16 years. I think about that morning sometimes. The chain on the ground and the burned cedar plank and her flat eyes in the early light, the way she stood up from that well wall. She'd been out there all night and she hadn't broken and she hadn't signed, and she was still standing when I came through that gate, and she is still standing. That's who she is. What she gave me, the staying, the choosing, the seeing what I was from that first morning and deciding it was worth something, is not a thing I take lightly. A man who has been 47 years in the world and moving because moving was the only direction he knew, and then finds a woman who sees him clearly and says yes to what she sees, that is a gift. The real kind. The kind that doesn't wear down. There is a horse in the south pasture right now. A good mare, getting on in years, with a gray around her muzzle that wasn't there when we bought her. She is standing at the far fence with her head up, looking at the caprock. The light on the rock this time of morning is the color of old copper. Inside the house, Vera is at the table. I can hear the scratch of her pen. She's going over the season's accounts. In a little while I'll go inside and she'll look up, and the look she gives me, straight, certain, warm in a way that doesn't perform warmth, will be the same look she's given me for 16 years. The well is in good shape. The fence is solid. This is the place I stopped.